Join me as I dive deep into the mystery of what really happened to the Sodder children on that fateful night. On Christmas Eve, 1945, a fire destroyed the Sodder family's home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. 5 of the 9 Sodder children were nowhere to be found, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions that still haunt us today. The event has become one of the most enduring unsolved mysteries in American history. George and Ginny Sodder had built what many would call the American dream. They were immigrants, Italian, hardworking, and respected in their community. George had come to the United States as a teenager, alone and driven, eventually establishing a successful trucking business hauling coal. He was known as a man of strong opinions, especially when it came to politics. His disdain for Benito Mussolini was no secret, and that may have earned him enemies, even among fellow Italian immigrants. But that night, none of it seemed to matter. The Sodders had 10 children. One had already moved away, but the other 9 lived together in the family's 2-story home. That Christmas Eve, spirits were high. The children had just opened a few gifts and were begging to stay up late, giddy with excitement. Ginny, their mother, agreed, but reminded them not to stay up too long. At around 10 p.m., she tucked in the youngest children and retired to bed with George and their baby, Sylvia. By midnight, the house would be in flames, and by dawn, 5 of their children would be missing. Just before 12:30 a.m., Ginny Sodder was jolted awake by the shrill ring of the house telephone. She made her way downstairs and answered. A woman's voice, unfamiliar, laughing, asking for someone Ginny didn't know. Behind the voice, clinking glasses, laughter, a party. Ginny told her she had the wrong number and hung up. But something about the call bothered her. It wasn't just the mistake, it was the eerie laughter, the pause before the woman spoke, as if she was checking to see who had picked up. Ginny returned to bed, but moments later, she noticed something else. The lights were still on, the curtains open, the front door unlocked. The children had promised to shut everything down before bed. But now, things didn't feel right. She turned off the lights, closed the curtains, and went back to sleep. That was the last moment of normalcy the family would ever know. At 1 a.m., Ginny woke again, this time to a loud bang, followed by a rolling sound on the roof. Then smoke. The smell was undeniable. Flames had erupted in George's office downstairs. In minutes, the fire spread through the staircase, cutting off the children sleeping upstairs from escape. George and Ginny grabbed the baby, Sylvia, and 3 of the children. But 5, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Ginny Jr., and Betty, were still trapped. George tried everything. He smashed a window to re-enter the home. He tried to climb the stairs, but the fire and smoke pushed him back. He ran outside and tried to retrieve his ladder to reach the upper windows, but it was gone. Then he tried to start his 2 trucks to drive them close enough to climb on top. Neither started. Neither had shown any issues the day before. George would later believe both had been sabotaged. As the fire engulfed the home, George screamed their names, hoping, praying, they would come to the windows. But the only answer was silence. By 2 a.m., the house had collapsed into smoldering ruins. The Fayetteville Fire Department didn't arrive until almost 8 a.m., hours after the fire had burned itself out. Their explanation? Most of the department's members were serving in the war. The local fire chief, F.J. Morris, didn't know how to drive the fire truck, so they had to wait for someone who did. By the time the firefighters began sifting through the ashes, the damage was done. But what they didn't find is what shocked everyone. No bones, no skulls, no remains of any kind. 5 children had supposedly died in that blaze. Yet the site was empty. The fire burned for only 45 minutes to an hour, hardly long enough, according to experts, to incinerate 5 human bodies to ash. Even animals in similar house fires had left behind bones. So where were the Sodder children? The authorities gave a simple answer. The fire had been hot enough to completely destroy them. But George and Ginny weren't convinced, and neither were others. Within days, the inconsistencies began to pile up. That missing ladder? It was found thrown into a ditch 75 feet from a house. The phone lines, which the family believed were severed during the fire, hadn't been burned. They'd been cut. A neighbor claimed to have seen someone removing a block and tackle from one of George's trucks that night. Another reported seeing a man watching the Sodder home from the roadside just before the fire started. And then came the strangest sighting of all. A woman claimed to have seen the missing children, alive, peering out a passing car during the fire. Others would later come forward saying they had seen the Sodder children in hotels, diners, and even boarding schools, always with unfamiliar adults, sometimes with different names, but always resembling the Sodder kids. Were they kidnapped? If so, why? And who had done it? George Sodder was a vocal critic of Mussolini, a dangerous position in a town with a significant Italian population. Months before the fire, a stranger came to the house looking for work. He warned George, unprompted, "Your house, it's going to go up in smoke. Someday, you'll pay for those things you say about Italy." Later, another man tried to sell George life insurance. When George refused, the man warned, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You'll be paid for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini." The Sodders didn't think much of the threats until it was too late. Could someone have sought revenge? Was this political? Or was it something more personal? In the days following the fire, the official explanation was swift. Authorities declared the cause to be faulty wiring. No autopsies, no coroner's inquest, no forensic analysis. Just a quick conclusion and a quick burial of any questions. The Sodders were advised to move on. But how do you grieve children when you have no graves to stand over? Jenny Sodder refused to believe her children had died. And George? He was obsessed, convinced someone had taken them, that the fire had been a cover-up. So instead of mourning, the Sodders began investigating. On their own, and what they uncovered made the official story fall apart piece by piece. First, the electrical theory. George had recently installed a brand new fuse box. Just weeks before, an electrician had inspected the home and declared the wiring safe. Plus, Jenny recalled, the lights had stayed on during the early stages of the fire. That would have been impossible if the fire had started with the wires. And then there was the speed. The fire supposedly started around 1 a.m. Yet by the time firefighters arrived, nearly 7 hours later, the house had already burned to the ground. The fire burned too fast, too hot. But again, no bodies. Desperate for answers, George began testing things himself. He burned animal bones in a barrel to see if they would disintegrate completely. They didn't. He consulted a local crematorium. The operator told him it takes 2 hours at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit to fully cremate a human body, and even then, bones remain. Their house had burned less than an hour. So why were there no remains? Was someone lying? By 1952, 7 years after the fire, the Sodders had spent nearly every penny they had chasing leads. They hired private investigators, traveled across states, paid for ads in newspapers. Every tip was followed. Most led nowhere. But one tip sparked something deeper. A woman claimed she had seen the children at a Charleston hotel weeks after the fire. They were with 2 unknown adults of Italian descent. She tried to speak to the children, but was quickly cut off. The Sodders begged authorities to investigate. They never did. So George and Jenny did something drastic. On a stretch of Route 16 near their home, they erected a massive billboard. On it were the faces of their 5 missing children, printed in stark black and white. Bold text asked, what was their fate? Kidnapped? Murdered? The mystery still exists. It became a landmark, a shrine, a protest, a message to the world. We haven't forgotten, and we won't stop looking. In 1967, 22 years after the fire, Jenny Sodder received a letter. It was postmarked from Kentucky. No return address. Inside was a photograph. A young man in his 20s. Dark eyes. Curly black hair. He looked familiar. Too familiar. On the back, a handwritten message. Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Illo boys. A 90132 or 35. The Sodders were stunned. Louis was 9 years old when he vanished. The resemblance to this man in the photo was uncanny. Could this be him, grown up, alive, and trying to reach out? They sent the photo to the FBI, begging them to investigate. The agency refused. No crime, they said. No jurisdiction. So the Sodders enlarged the photo, framed it, and added it to the billboard. Another mystery, tacked to a wall of heartbreak. So many oddities, so many questions. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, had once claimed he found a heart in the ashes, but didn't tell the family. He later admitted to burying it in a box behind the house. When George retrieved it, a pathologist examined the object. It wasn't a heart. It was beef liver, untouched by fire. Why would a fire chief lie about finding remains? Was he trying to give the family closure? Or was he covering something up? Then there was the school bus driver. On the morning of the fire, he told investigators he saw people throwing balls of fire at the Sodder home from the road. Later, Jenny remembered hearing something hit the roof before the flames started. Could the fire have been started with Molotov cocktails? And if so, by who and why? Some began to suspect the Italian mafia. George, outspoken against Mussolini, may have offended powerful people, even within his own community. Could someone have ordered a hit? Was the fire meant as a warning? A chilling theory emerged that the children had been kidnapped by a trafficking ring or mafia group, then sent overseas or raised under new identities. Some even claimed to have seen the children in Italy years later. The Sodders sent letters across Europe, hired detectives to travel to Sicily, but nothing ever stuck. No proof, no closure, just silence. Jenny Sodder never wore black before 1945. After that night, she wore nothing but, for the rest of her life. Every day, she tended to a garden where the house once stood. She surrounded the site with a fence and no trespassing signs. She believed, truly, that her children were still alive. The pain never faded, nor did the hope. She died in 1989, never knowing what happened. George died in 1969. Jenny, 20 years later. The remaining Sodder children have passed as well. But the mystery? Still unsolved. No remains, no confessions, no leads that ever led anywhere. Just a house that burned and 5 children who vanished into the night. To this day, historians, sleuths, and conspiracy theorists continue to debate. Were the Sodder children murdered? Or were they taken? And if they were taken, did they live out their lives somewhere else, never knowing their real names? Or were they silenced forever? The billboard is gone now, removed in the 1980s. But for decades, it stood as a symbol, not just of loss, but of refusal to forget. The site where the Sodder home once stood is just grass now. No gravestones, no plaques, just stories whispered across time. In 2024, a new wave of interest brought the case back into headlines. True crime forums, TikTok sleuths, Reddit threads dissecting every clue, every theory. Yet, the mystery remains, frozen in time. On Christmas Eve, 1945, 5 children disappeared in a fire, smoke, and silence. Their names were Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. Their faces, once burned into a roadside billboard, now live on in memory, in mystery, in questions that still have no answers. So, what really happened to the Sodder children? Was it revenge? Kidnapping? A cruel twist of fate? Or something darker, buried in the ashes of history? What do you think really happened? Drop your theories below. And if this story shook you, watch our next video, The Family's Secret Buried Under the Oak Tree.